Hi, this is Emily Cummings, and I'm going to be doing my final paper for diversity as a video recording. So I'm going to be discussing a few different things here. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the book that we had, Multicultural Education, Transformative Knowledge and Action, and that was by James Banks. So we read this book for the course, and I just wanted to discuss a few different people that, after reading about them, really impacted a few of my thoughts on diversity. I had never heard about any of these people before reading this book, so this was very informative for me. Um, so a few of the historical figures that I wanted to discuss. The first one was Allison Davis, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him and then why I found him to be so interesting. So Allison Davis has conducted and been involved in several studies, but I chose one in particular that I found to be very influential. And the one that I found most interesting was the study that he had done called the Deep South. And in that study, he had conducted many extensive interviews with black and white residents in Mississippi where he had been living. And he was investigating the social dynamics of caste, which is the concept by which racial identity is theorized, and class. The result was the study titled Deep South, and it presented an unsparing vision of the communities it explored. So in the South, the authors wrote, and I quote, "As a contribution to our knowledge of sociology and the interactions of a small, deeply divided human group, this book deserves a high place." So it had great reviews, and basically the point of this study, what they were doing was discussing how different the black individuals as opposed to the white individuals in this specific area in Mississippi, how different their lives were and how different they were treated and the different classes that they were categorized into just because of the color of their skin. So I found that quite interesting. Again, I'm going to reiterate this just a little bit. Educational ambitions associated with middle class norms and white collar occupations are not made to appear valuable or certain to the lower class children. And that's kind of what they discussed there, is how for the white individuals, education is something that is just a norm. It's just what you do. Nobody questions it. As opposed to the black children, it's something that is made to be out of reach for them and something that almost is unattainable. So I found that really interesting. So it also went in to just kind of discuss how that child who has education as unattainable, he learns from his family and teachers that the chances for a person in his lower class position to finish high school and college and to become socially mobile through education are so slight in view of the economic position and classways of his family that they scarcely exist. And that's found on page 286. So I just thought it was really interesting how in this same region, in the same town, how different lives were for these different individuals, and it was all based on caste and class. So I found that very interesting. And I just pointed out here that one thing that I'm going to try to implement in my classroom is really trying to understand that there are differences in culture, and I know sometimes, for me anyways, it's difficult to really understand what people are talking about when they think that they're being treated differently or that somebody is being racist against them. It's really hard to understand for me because I have never been in that position. So after reading about this, it was blatantly clear that there obviously is some differences. These people are being treated very differently. And their mindsets are different, and it's instilling this thought into these kids that I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to have an education, which is just horrible. And so I just thought that for me in my classroom, I really want to make an effort to understand the differences in culture and just really try to understand that this is something that's really difficult. It's really difficult for a lot of my students. I work at a very diverse school, so I think sometimes I glance over the fact that there are differences and that some of my students do get treated differently out in the world, and that's something that I need to recognize. Another individual that I found to be very interesting in the readings was Carter G. Woodson. And again, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him and then I'll talk about what I want to use in my classroom. So, Carter G. Woodson was known as the father of Black history. He offered an alternative approach to the education of African Americans. So, one of his most popular works was a book of essays titled The Miseducation of the Negro, an educational system that taught African American students to imitate and to aspire to white culture. So that's kind of what he was getting at, is that he was addressing the fact that education is really not properly educating our African American students. Instead, they are teaching them to imitate the white students and encouraging them to aspire to be a white student. But then again, they were also making it impossible for these African American students to ever live up to that expectation. And what this was doing in the African American students, it was causing them to develop a sort of contempt and hate towards their own race and their own culture because they were constantly being pressured to become something that just was not attainable and not reasonable, obviously. So this was just really difficult for these students, and so Woodson decided to put together a book of essays and kind of address this issue and what we need to be doing in our educational systems to really educate these African American students instead of what we were doing wrong and what we probably still are doing wrong. So he believed in educating the students about their past, and he believed by educating the students about what their ancestors had done would inspire them to become leaders in their culture and in society in general. He also mentioned that these students needed to be taught to think critically because they were so used to being taught to imitate white students. So instead of being taught to imitate, he was wanting to teach them to think critically, think on their own, come up with their own ideas. So that's a little bit about Woodson and a little bit about of what I would like to share in my classroom, or what I would like to implement in my classroom, is that each student needs to be taught in a different way. There's no such thing as students being able to have one curriculum or one strategy or one type of relationship that works for every single student. It just doesn't exist. I work in the special education classroom, and just with special education, I have noticed that every single one of my students are different. And one strategy that works with one of my students, which is like a love and logic type of model, doesn't work at all with another one of my students. Another student needs to have somebody who's more strict and doesn't give her choices. So this kind of just made me think of that, how every student is different and every student needs to be taught differently. And going back to our white students versus our black students, that's something that also needs to be addressed. Their cultures are different, they're very diverse in their upbringings, and of course, that means that the students need to be taught differently. So I think that's something that we all need to keep in mind when we are planning our lessons. So one last person that I found to be inspiring in this book was Mary McLeod. And I just thought that she was a very interesting lady. She was an American educator and a civil rights leader. And she is best known for starting a school for African American students. She studied a year under, or rather, instead of studied, she worked at another school, and I'm trying to think of the lady's name. Anyway, she did that for a year, and I believe the last name was Laney. And while working under her, she learned a lot about being strict and what kind of education she really wanted to pursue. So after that, and this was in Florida, she started this school for African American students, and then eventually it turned into a university. And she was also an advisor for President Franklin D. Roosevelt, so she was quite successful. She was also known as the First Lady of the Struggle because a lot of most of her life was dedicated towards making education better for African American students. So that was very interesting for me to read about. So once again, she adopted many of Delaney, was the lady's name, of her education philosophies. And basically what she wanted to do was to improve education and improve conditions for Black people by educating primarily women is what she focused on. And one quote that she said was, "I believe that the greatest hope for the development of my race lies in training our women thoroughly and practically." And I just thought that that was really interesting that she believed that the future of her culture and her race lied within the women. And I just find that so interesting. And I think that that's something that I can apply to my classroom, is that I need to focus a lot of my attention on the females in my classroom, because we all know that women, they just have a different presence and they're very impactful. And I believe that women are also very impacted by their mentors and those who are able to lead them. And I believe that women who have good leaders and good mentors are going to be successful. And I always try to be that for my students. And I think that that's something that I need to continue to do and even do a better job of, making myself known and letting my female students know that I am there for them. I am there to support them and encourage them and really be their support system, because I think that women especially need that, and I think that they are our future. All right, so the next part that I wanted to go into a little bit were the lectures that were posted on Blackboard, and these were kind of the PowerPoints that I wanted to go over. So there were 3 different PowerPoints that made the biggest impact on me. The first one is the topic of religion, and that's something that's always been very sensitive to me because I grew up in a Baptist home. I attended church 3 days a week and still do. So it's something that is very difficult to wrap my mind around and be appreciative and understanding of other religions, and it's something that I'm working on. So I found the religion PowerPoint to be very interesting. It just kind of discussed bringing awareness. It discussed how we should use religion in our classrooms. And that takes me into, it discussed bringing awareness, not acceptance, to one specific religion. And that's something that we really need to focus on, regardless of what religion our students are. We really need to focus on not necessarily accepting one religion, but just kind of making them known and informing our students, educating them. And that's kind of the next part of what that PowerPoint discussed, educating our students on religion, not necessarily promoting one religion over the other. So I thought that that was really interesting, and that kind of goes into culturally responsive teaching, because we do want our students to be aware of the different religions that are out there, and we want to inform them. But we don't want to sway them in any way, and we don't want to impact them and tell them one religion is better than the other. So that's something that we really need to keep in mind. Another PowerPoint that affected me was the multicultural literacy PowerPoint, and I found that to be quite interesting. That kind of discussed multiculturally literate teachers and how we should continually invest time into learning about the cultures of our students and where our students come from, their histories, their customs, their mores, their skills, their values, their communication styles, their challenges, there's just so many things that we can learn from our students, and especially students who come from different cultures. It's just so fun for teachers and students to learn about different cultures and the way that different people do things. So I think that that's really important. So another aspect that PowerPoint went into, one topic was many non-white ethnic groups are not achieving their academic potential. Teachers must know how to facilitate their improvement by teaching in ways that build upon rather than neglect the knowledge and skills that they bring to school. And I just thought that was really interesting and something that I probably need to do better of. Instead of teaching your students and forgetting about what they know and forgetting about their culture and their diversity, we need to take all of that. We need to take all of the information and all of the experiences that our students are bringing into us, and we need to use that to teach them. And I think that that's something that could really help us. I think that when our students can relate to something, or we can make material or a difficult concept relate to where our students have come from, I think that that's something that could really help them learn, and it's something that we really need to keep in mind. The other aspect of that PowerPoint was that we need to provide all students with alternative cultural lenses and opportunities. And I've kind of discussed this a little bit, but we want to make sure that our students aren't leaving our classroom completely narrow-minded. So whether there's a student like me who grew up every day going to a specific church, or whether they're a student who has traveled the world, we really need to make sure that they're very open-minded and understanding and appreciative of other cultures. And I think one way to do that is to get rid of the mystery. I think if we have several students in a classroom who are from different cultures, have them share, have them talk about their culture. Because I think once we take that mystery away and we inform our students, they're much more responsive with that. The last PowerPoint that I wanted to discuss was the parent and community involvement PowerPoint, and this really hit close to home because my parents were always very involved with my school and my education and our sports and everything. So it's really difficult for me to see family members who are not involved in their child's education. But after being able to read this PowerPoint and kind of study this topic, I was really informed about it. I really was kind of taken back that I never had considered the fact that why would a parent come to a parent-teacher conference or an assembly if they speak a different language and there's not going to be a translator there? Or maybe they don't have money to take a bus to the school. And those are just little things that after I read about it, I was like, oh yeah, duh. But before, I never really had considered those other positions, and it makes me feel really bad because I think that a lot of my students' parents are just really unable to attend a lot of the events at the school, and that makes me think of, what are we doing wrong in the school? We need to make these events in the school accessible to every parent, every family, and I just think that that's something that's kind of flawed that we need to look into. And another aspect about that PowerPoint that I found to be helpful was the graph that was shown on there that kind of discussed a specific topic, and then it talked about how a lopsided relationship between a parent and a teacher and a mutual relationship. And those are really important aspects for us to think about when we're communicating with parents, because I think that sometimes we don't consider, especially if we don't have kids, because I don't have kids, and so sometimes it's difficult for me to understand what a parent is thinking. So one example that they gave was the academic support was the topic, and the lopsided relationship, the teacher said, have your children follow my directions about their homework and other assignments. And then the mutual relationship example was, here are some ways to monitor your children's homework and build their skills. Tell us what else you do to help your children. So instead of just telling the parent, you need to do this or you need to follow my directions, it's more of a collaboration with the parent and a team building and I'm not doing this on my own, you're not doing this on your own, we're going to do this together, we're going to do this as a team, we're going to come up with the best possible solution to any problems that we have, and we're going to work together to get there. And I think that that's an important message that we really need to send to our parents, and communicating those thoughts is very important, and we have to be very careful in some of the things that we say. Another example given was parent support, and the lopsided relationship said, train your children to respect and obey school staff at all times. And then the mutual relationship said, let's work together to develop a code of conduct and promote appropriate behavior. So again, that was another example of where with the mutual relationship, you're kind of telling the parent, we need to work together to get to a certain spot. We're having a few difficulties. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. We just need to work together to get where we need to be. So I thought that was really helpful information, and I really plan on using that in my classroom. I just had a parent the other day who called and was having a difficult time with their son. He was not listening to her, and she was telling me that she was giving him 10 warnings before there were any consequences. And right away I was like, well, that's your problem. You're giving him too many warnings. And he knows I get 10 warnings before I have to do anything. So just things like that. You don't want to come across and say, oh, well, obviously you're doing that wrong. Instead, you want to come across with a mutual relationship and say, well, I think that there's other ways or other things that we can try to see if those might work. So I thought that was really helpful. The next aspect that I'm going to move into here is class discussions. So I just wanted to discuss 2 of the different classes that we met in person and some important factors that I took away from with those. So the first one was it was on October 2nd, and we kind of were talking about issues impacting teaching and learning. And we're talking about how there's so many issues that can impact our teaching and a child's learning, and we need to be aware of these factors. So a few of them that we discussed were poverty, expectations, race, gender, and we also talked about how we need to discuss ways to respond to student needs, and that there are many components of education equity, such as access, attitude, materials, instruction, interactions, communication, and assessments. So I just found this to be quite helpful as far as we need to realize that students are coming to us after they have experienced many other situations. They could be other teachers, and they all have varying home lives, and we need to realize that they're very, very important issues that are impacting these students' education and impacting their ability to understand the material and to be able to sit still in their chair for 20 minutes. So those are all things that we need to focus on. We need to realize that just because a student is acting out, we can't just jump to the fact that, oh, he's just a bad kid. We need to realize that, oh, well, he's acting out because his mom hasn't been home in 3 days, or whatever the issue is. We just need to realize that our students are coming to us with many different problems and many issues, and we need to be understanding. We need to be a support system for those students, because once we support them, they trust us. And once your student trusts you, they are willing to do whatever assignment that you ask of them. But first you need to build that rapport and that trust with them. And the way that you can do that is understand issues that are impacting them and hopefully help them to overcome those issues. So another class that I found to be extremely interesting, actually probably this was the class that I enjoyed the most, was when we had the individual come in and speak with us about religion, and Islam in particular. And a few points that he pointed out was every religion is a reflection of the culture where it is practiced. And he also said that religion has a strong overlay of culture, and religion instructs culture and culture instructs religion. So his point here was that he was trying to get the point across that religion and culture are one and the same, and that whatever religion you are, your culture affects that, and your culture impacts that. And I just found this to be really interesting, along with a lot of other points that he made. After that class, I really got a much clearer idea of what Islam is and what this religious group believes, and where they're coming from. And I never had realized before how threatened that group is, and how all the issues that they have to deal with being in the United States. And it's quite sad that the United States is supposed to be a free country and the melting pot, and yet we're very much not accepting of certain religions and certain cultures, and that's kind of what was discussed that night. And I just thought that that was very interesting, and I think that that's something that we also need to keep in mind in our classroom, that once again, kind of going back to the impact issues and that impact our students, this could be an issue that's impacting one of our Islam students. You know, imagine going to your church and having policemen standing at the door and questioning your dad or your brother or your uncle. And I think that that's something that we need to realize, that not every religion is like our religion, and something that I need to really think about and try to apply in my classroom. So the next part I wanted to kind of discuss from there is kind of go into issues concerning students, such as engagement, environment, and assessments. So there's many issues that we need to be aware of in our classrooms, such as the environment and engaging our students. If we are unaware of our students' culture, there's no way that we're going to be able to ensure that they're in a learning environment where they're able to succeed. And on that same note, how will we know the best way to keep our students engaged during a lesson when we don't even know their culture, where they're coming from? I think by digging into our students' culture and learning about each of our students individually, we'll be more equipped to properly assess them academically and to pursue a teacher-student relationship with them. And I think the issues concerning students, such as, you know, the engagement and the environment and all these other factors, I think it really just comes down to knowing your students. And I think that the better you know your student, the better you're able to assess their progress and better able to provide them an environment where they're going to succeed. So the last part that I wanted to discuss was the most important ideas that I am going to take away from this course. So I am walking away from this course with two main ideas that have really stuck with me. So the first one is being understanding of people and where they come from. As I was thinking about that, I wanted to say being understanding of different cultures, but I really hate to say cultures because it's not about the culture. It's about the people. It's about being accepting of other humans, because they have just as much of a right to be here as we do. So I think that using culture is just not appropriate here. I want to use people, because I think that we really need to understand that behind these different cultures are people. They're just people, and they're just wanting to practice their religions and their cultures the way that they were raised. And I think that we need to be more understanding of that. So that's one thing that I am taking away from that. And another important idea that I have taken away is a simple realization that not all students come from the same home lives that we are used to. And once again, I think that we need to recognize these differences and not pretend that they don't exist, because I don't think that that's going to help anyone. I don't think that's going to help the student. I don't think that's going to help their peers, and I don't think that's going to help the teachers. I think that bringing this to light and bringing the differences to light and informing other students is what's really going to help the student and their peers. So I plan on actualizing these new thoughts into my classroom by creating an autobiography project, kind of like the one that we did for this course. I really want to create something where these students are able to express where they come from, who are they, what are they about, what do they enjoy, what do they love doing, what kind of food did they like. I just think that creating a project like this for them to present to their teachers and to their peers is really going to let everybody get a better idea of who this student is instead of making assumptions. I also think that by presenting these projects, that it will encourage the class to have different discussions of cultures and the history behind the cultures. And I just think that that would just be a great project to do every year for my students, because it would allow me a chance to get to know them even better. So that's all the information that I wanted to share, and I hope that I covered everything here. I just wanted to kind of discuss what I learned in this course and what I found to be the most valuable.